Okay, let's take two. I have the pleasure of introducing Lisa Colton, a fellow Lisa. And she's, as you can see, great picture of her in the outdoors, co-founder and executive producer of Urgency Now, the Seattle Jewish Climate Festival, and founder of this wonderful organization, Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest. And I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself, how she got involved. And I think we just take it away, Lisa.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here. And, after these 2 years of being virtual and working kind of on a national basis, it's really great to be doing something here in Washington State and with people I know are just down the street. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'd like to just start by asking each of you to note something about our environmental world that has changed for you in the past, let's say 5 to 10 years. Like, go ahead and throw something in the chat, something that's affected your personal life or your family or something that you observe. Maybe it's how politics are changing or how you're thinking about the next car you're going to buy. These are things that are affecting our daily lives today in disruptive ways that are sometimes difficult to deal with, but also sometimes really productive. And we're going to talk today about productive disruption. And so that would be a great way to learn about what's actually on your mind and in your heart today as well. I'll tell you just a little bit about my background and then talk about the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest and how it started and what it's doing and what you can do in your own life too. And Tony, I totally appreciate the better summers. For the time being, even with smoke here in Seattle, we are having some benefits. I will admit to that. And colder, maybe wetter winters. Great. Thank you for pulling those into the chat. Feel free to continue. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Laurelhurst in Seattle. My dad was born in Seattle. My grandmother was born in Seattle. So I feel a very deep connection to Seattle and Washington State. And also to my Jewish heritage, going back, thousands and thousands of years, and feel a real responsibility to take the wisdom of our ancestors and be applying it to our modern challenges. I went to school in California, spent a year and a half in Jerusalem after college. And when I came back, trying to get involved in the American Jewish community in a new and different kind of way than I had grew up in, ended up starting a nonprofit that was helping Jewish organizations use technology in new ways, particularly to engage younger demographics. And from websites to social media to education to community building, what that has looked like over the past 20 years that I've been doing this is like constantly changing. But going into the pandemic, one thing that I had a lot of experience with was working virtually and designing for content, education, and a sense of community and connectivity online and virtually, which was a huge advantage. And so that's a little bit of the backstory. I do strategic planning, communications consulting, and kind of a lot of urging people to be innovative in their business models and their community design, mostly in the Jewish community, and then a little bit in social causes and small businesses outside of that as well. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen and just take you through a handful of slides that I have prepared to just kind of illustrate what we did in the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest and how we got there. So hold on, let me just make sure I'm sharing the right thing and getting it to full screen. One sec. Didn't I hide all the right windows? Oh no, I closed the one window that I wanted. Just a second. Hold on one sec. I can go back to my slides here. Hold on. Make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Okay. Now, I hope you're seeing the right thing. Do we have the slideshow? Thumbs up. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Way too many windows open tonight. Awesome. So I want to talk to you about leading through disruptive change. And first of all, I want to take us way back in history, because one of the things that Jews are really good at is leading in times of disruptive change. So who knows what this is? A depiction of? You can go ahead and unmute. You can throw it in the chat if you want. It is the temple in Jerusalem, right? So way back when, 2,000 years ago, we had this amazing center of Jewish life in Jerusalem, and then it got sacked and destroyed. And what happened when the thing that our whole religion and society was based around got destroyed? Anybody know? You can unmute, offer a thought, put it in the chat if you want.
Dispersal?
Yes, so dispersal, exactly. What happened even before that? When all of our major rituals, right, our major holidays, like Shavuot and Sukkot and Passover, we came to Jerusalem with gifts and brought it to the high priest who was here. And now there's no high priest and there's no gathering space in Jerusalem. So what do? We invented synagogues and rabbinic Judaism, which we now take completely and totally for granted. But 2,000 years ago, that was not normative. Everything revolved around the temple in Jerusalem. So here was a catastrophic event that happened that one could have said, and I'm sure at the time many people did say, well, I guess we're done. Whole thing is over. The organizing principle of how we do what we do doesn't exist anymore. But no, some brilliant thinkers, and I'm sure there was a lot of controversy about this at the time, said, okay, what really matters here? And how do we re-architect our society, our norms, our rituals, our structures of authority in order to continue the essence of who we are and what we believe in? And we invented rabbis with authority and synagogues as a place to decentralize and have those rituals in each of our own communities. And then as we all dispersed, you're right, we were thrown in lots of different directions. We did another thing that's totally radical, which is we wrote down the oral Torah. So the tradition that was passed on orally from one generation to the next, when people weren't gathering all in Jerusalem anymore to keep the story straight, right? We all know how the game of telephone works. We decided that wasn't going to work so well when we were all dispersed throughout the world. And so we actually wrote down the oral Torah, which became the Mishnah and the Talmud, so that we would all literally be reading from the same script. So I give you these examples to say, actually, Jews are really good at disruptive change. And we're living through major disruptive change right now. We're immersed in it, and so sometimes it's hard to see. But I'll give you an example of Encyclopedia Britannica, which was the gold standard of knowledge management literally for hundreds of years, right? We took it as truth. It cost thousands of dollars. It weighed hundreds of pounds. Very few people could actually afford it. Most of us had to go find a library to access it. There were only a certain number of entries. And by the way, it was out of date the moment that you bought it, right? But we thought it was the best thing ever. And now we have Wikipedia, which you might complain about. You might say it's not trustworthy because everybody is crowdsourcing, but it has actually a great standard of accuracy. It is up to date, literally minute by minute. It is published in multiple languages, and it has an infinite number of entries of things that people think are important and worth putting in the public record. So that's just another example of disruptive change that's happening in business models. You could also look at taxis to Uber or Airbnb or the music industry. Like every single industry has been touched by this. We're living through it. And one of the ways that we are living through that is with regard to our climate. And our tradition actually has a history in this issue too. And the origin of the Big Bull Jewish Climate Fest actually came from a conversation that the social justice group at Covenant Cooperative, where I'm a partner, we were talking about the story of Noah and how things weren't going great in society. And God said, gosh, maybe we just want to wipe this slate clean. And told Noah that this could happen, told Noah to build an ark. And Noah, different than some other leaders in our history, didn't negotiate with God, didn't try to push back and say, yeah, maybe there's some evil people, but we should really save society. He was just like, all right, I'll do what you say. And he starts building an ark. Now, when you look at this rendering of what the ark might have looked like in full scale, you think if Noah's building this thing in front of all of society that he's living in, you would think it would beg some questions, right? What do you think people thought when they saw Noah building this thing? Probably stirred up a little bit of conversation, right? Like, what's this all about? But Noah didn't really use it, or at least the Torah doesn't tell us he did, as a conversation piece to make a point to get people to change their ways so that God wouldn't have to wipe the earth clean, right? We look at some things that are happening in our society today. The hurricanes are getting worse, the tornadoes are getting worse, the fires that are happening, right? There's lots of things going on actually that we can point to that go back to at least being exacerbated by climate change. And they are incredibly disruptive, incredibly public events. They are big news. Our sky goes dark and turns orange for weeks at a time because of these fires. And yet, are we getting the message? Similar to Noah building an ark in the middle of the town square and people didn't quite get the message. So our challenge is to think about how do we get that message across in a little clearer way to actually make change. So when at Covenant we were studying Noah, this is in 2019, we started talking about what we could be doing to help contribute to change around climate, particularly in Seattle and Washington State. We have a governor who was very forward thinking about this. And so we started thinking about what Covenant could do. And decided that one of the ways that we could connect to this issue was to educate the Jewish community about what the Seattle City Council was trying to put forth in terms of making climate-friendly decisions for our city. And we invited three city council members, or two city council members, and one gentleman who was really involved in helping the city council develop its policy. To come talk about that process and what they have decided and how the citizens of Seattle could help support the implementation of that plan. And then we invited Nigel Savage, he's since stepped down as the CEO of Hazon, which is one of the major kind of Jewish environmental organizations. And then we thought, gosh, if we have all these amazing guests, this shouldn't just be for Covenant, this should be for anyone across the city who wants to come participate. And that was the origin of the Urgency of Now, Seattle's Jewish Climate Fest, which happened at the beginning of 2020, just moments before the pandemic, where we were all still innocent and ignorant that this all would come down crashing on our heads. And we invited all the other Jewish organizations in Seattle who wanted to participate to be part of this. And we anchored it in Tu B'Shvat, which is kind of the Jewish Earth Day, the New Year of the trees, which over time has become kind of the environmental or Jewish Earth Day kind of holiday, which we thought was appropriate for this conversation. And so instead of every synagogue doing a Tu B'Shvat Seder where 25 people are eating dried fruit, we thought, gosh, let's make this more about action and education around climate. So you'll see listed here the variety of events that local organizations contributed to the festival. Our keynote event with the city council members and Nigel Savage was at the Collective downtown on Dexter. And we had a few hundred people in the room and a really vibrant conversation about why this matters so much and how here in Seattle we're really leading in a lot of ways on policy. And then there were seders and there were nature hikes and there was art and there was tree planting and a whole bunch of other opportunities for people to engage with Tu B'Shvat. Maybe some of you were part of that as well. So at the conclusion of that, everybody said, gosh, we should do this in multiple cities. And we thought that would be a great idea, except then the pandemic happened. And so as the next year rolled around, we thought, you know what? Oh, I think I skipped a slide here. Hold on. Yeah, here we go. There we go. We thought, gosh, we could do this online and make it a national event instead of just a local event. And just a few months before, I had produced the Great Big Jewish Food Fest at the very beginning of the pandemic, noting that so many chefs and cookbook authors and caterers and experts in the food industry had their businesses closed. And so many of us were at home cooking more than we ever had. And I kind of did the overlap of that Venn diagram, and I thought, gosh, there's something here that would be fun and relatively easy to do online, even though it sounds ridiculous to throw a food festival online where you can't taste or smell anything. But 25,000 people showed up from all around the world to learn and cook and share together. And it was an amazing sense of community. So knowing that that template had already worked, we applied a lot of those same lessons to the Climate Fest and launched the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest, which happened in Tu B'Shvat of 2021. And then more recently, we just did it again this January for Tu B'Shvat of 2022. So a few examples of what that looked like. I'll back up a second to say in many faith communities, we're trying to connect our values and our sense of responsibility for one another and our sense of responsibility for the earth and God's creation, and to connect those values to our actions. And in 2015, the Pope actually published an encyclical called Laudato Si, which is basically the Catholic Church's statement about why climate change, fighting climate change matters, and that it is every Catholic person's job to contribute to the solution and not be part of the problem. But in the Jewish community, we don't have a singular figurehead. Maybe if the temple was still standing, we would. But because we have rabbinic Judaism, we have lots of authority figures. And so no one person who can make that statement the same way that the Pope did. And so by creating this platform and bringing together thousands of people and hundreds of experts across the Jewish spectrum, we're really trying to build a sense of momentum and using our collective voice to say to other Jews and also to society at large, this matters and we need to pay attention and not just give it lip service, but to actually focus on the things that will make an important and meaningful difference, not only for us, but for our kids and grandkids who are the ones who will really be living through this. So the first year, one of the sessions that we had included Eric Fingerhut, who's the CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America. And that's a position that, while is not a religious figurehead, definitely is a strong political voice that affects the rest of the Jewish community. Ruth Messenger, who's been a huge leader in New York and New York City politics and was the CEO of AJWS for many, many years. And the other people you see in this first image, me and Rabbi Jenny Rosen, who is the founder and CEO of Dayenu, which is a Jewish organization committed to climate action. And then this year, we really featured a lot of youth voices. So these two young women are high school and college students, and I will tell you that the Jewish youth are incredibly passionate about this issue and are really calling on their parents and grandparents and established communal leaders to take this issue seriously. that it is something that is already impacting their lives. It's making them think about how many children they want to have, where they're going to live, what careers they're going to have, how safe or unsafe or secure or insecure they feel about the future. And they are acutely aware that their lives will be defined by climate change. Hard stop. I'm in my 40s. I can say, yeah, by the time it gets really bad, I'm probably on my way out. They are very clear that they are living, this is a life-defining issue for them. And while they don't expect adults to be able to solve it quickly, because it's not a problem that can be solved quickly, they do know that adults are the ones in positions of power and authority now, and the clock is ticking. And that if we don't reverse this in the next 10 years, it is going to have really catastrophic consequences for their generation and for their kids and grandkids. So they're asking us to take it seriously and to take action. So we see this showing up in lots of ways. This is a survey that was done after the 2020 election of Jewish voters. And second to the pandemic, climate change was the top issue on the mind of Jewish voters. Those two top issues have not existed on this polling in previous elections. So we see that the priorities of the electorate are changing very quickly. And actually that young Jews especially think it's incredibly hypocritical that as a moral people, we aren't speaking more strongly to this particular issue. And Beth Sorrell, who runs the Jewish Community Foundation in San Diego, said at the Climate Fest this year, you know, at any time she engages with a Jewish organization, it's infused with Jewish values. You go to services, you look at the educational program, you look at the community building that's happening. She said it infused with Jewish values everywhere until you walk into the finance committee meeting, and then the values are left outside the door and it's only about dollars and numbers. And that, in fact, one of the most profound places that we can be making change is where we're investing our dollars. And I'll get to that in just a moment because it's an important way that you can help take action and advocate for it. So a few things that you can do on multiple levels in your own life. And then I'll stop talking and take your questions and we can have some conversation about how we bring these things to life. So first, to think about using clean electricity as your power in all sorts of places. Here in Seattle, actually, they've just passed a new building code that any new construction can't have gas in it anymore as a way of trying to minimize our use of power that isn't so clean. So there's a few different ways that you can do that. First, if you're going to buy or lease a car, choose one that's electric or hybrid. It gets you completely off of gasoline. My husband drives an electric car, and I can tell you he's really thrilled right now to not be going to the gas pump and filling up. Second is to think about where that electricity is coming from. Because even if you're driving an electric car, if the power that you're using to charge that car is coming from coal, for example, you're not actually helping the problem all that much. So you need to make sure that that electricity is clean. There's a few different ways to do that. You can put solar panels on your roof. I just did this last year. And through 2022, there is a 26% federal tax credit, which means you're saving an awful lot of money right off the top. And it is a capital investment in your home. It actually increases the value of your home, and they expect the price of electricity is going to continue to go up, and the value of solar panels on your roof will increase the value of your home increasingly over time. And that the technology is now at a great place that you can feel really confident about those investments. I have an app on my phone where I can actually see how much power is being generated at any given time relative to the use, which in the summertime in Seattle with our really long days is phenomenal. And our solar panels cover a little more than half of our electricity averaged over the year. It produces about 250% of our power in the summertime, but obviously with our shorter days and more cloud cover, a lot less in the winter. But here in Washington State, if I'm feeding power back into the grid because I'm overproducing what we're using, it actually rolls my bill all the way back, averaged out across the year. So it's brought down our power costs a lot and makes me really happy to see how much power we're generating on our roof. You can also buy into community solar. So community solar is where the panels are somewhere else, but you're actually making sure that those panels are being built and used and added to the grid. So if you're a Puget Sound Energy customer, for example, you can go to their website and you can opt to have your power come from community solar. So instead of paying to install solar panels on your own roof, you're kind of like in a co-op model for solar panels that are on someone else's property. So you can go to the Puget Sound Energy website and search for solar or search for clean energy, and you'll find all sorts of options that are literally like you can just sign up for a program and in one phone call have made that decision to have clean electricity coming into your house. All right, next is using your vote. We hear from our elected officials on a city, state, and federal level that they know the right decisions to make. They know that those decisions are important and critical, but they need to hear it from their constituents. So choosing to vote, using your vote to elect people who are actually going to take that issue seriously and make decisions about climate is critically important, and to make sure that those elected officials know that you care about this issue. And that can be signing petitions, it can be sending them an email, it can be raising your voice. The louder we make this issue, the more of a mandate our elected officials have to make strong decisions that make a really big difference. We know that policy and dollars are the things that are really going to move the needle. By all means, turning off the light when you leave the bathroom is really important. But that alone, even across millions of people, is not actually going to solve our climate issue. But the decisions that our elected officials make and how we invest our money makes a huge difference. And that leads me to the third, which is how we invest in solutions and stop investing in the systems that are problematic. Across the Jewish community, counting donor-advised funds that individuals may have, endowments of synagogues and JCCs and day schools, and foundations that support work in the Jewish world, there is over $100 billion invested. That's a lot of money. And if that money is invested in the oil companies that are continuing the systems and the problems that have got us here, we really are still contributing to the problem. But by pulling your money out of those and putting it into the places that are investing in new systems, solar companies as an example, you're really casting a vote with your dollars about what's important to be invested in. And by the way, the research over the past couple of years is that those investments are incredibly successful. So while 20 years ago, this question of pulling out of the oil companies and investing in renewable energy might have had consequences on the bottom line, the fact of the matter is now you're getting great returns in these funds that are investing in clean energy. This also applies to your personal investments as well. But one of the things that you can do as an active member of the Jewish community is to encourage the organizations that you're involved with to move their endowments into funds that are socially and environmentally responsible. Congregation Beth Shalom, just over the past few years, has gotten really active about this and worked with the Jewish Federation of Greater Seattle to create an option to have these socially and environmentally responsible funds available. So the Federation actually manages the endowments of many organizations in our community, and now you can opt in to have your donor advised fund through the Federation or your synagogue's endowment in these more responsible funds. And that collectively makes a really big difference, and also models to the community that you're literally putting your money where your mouth is and connecting Jewish values to our actions in the world. And so with that, I will wrap up and am happy to take any questions about the Climate Fest, about any of those 3 recommendations that I just made, or anything else you want to talk about. Feel free to unmute and share your thoughts, ask questions, or put them in the chat if you'd like.
I just want to say I am very impressed by the complete story that you told, with the complete understanding of how things came about, and as a Jewish people, what our values are and what's important to us, and it makes total sense what you're saying. So, I've always heard, okay, don't leave the lights on, but I mean, of course, that's just one teeny little part, but not enough. And that was an interesting comment. So it's some of the bigger things. So maybe I should let my husband buy the electric car that he wants to buy.
Yes, about the electric car. I mean, it's amazing how we're seeing that shift so quickly. And as corporations especially make big shifts, I think it's Amazon actually has committed to being, I don't know if it's carbon neutral, but Climate Pledge Arena, they're like in it. They've put it in big green lights. And they are actually getting rid of their entire fleet of Sprinter vans and moving to electric vehicles. So generating that power cleanly and powering their entire delivery system on clean energy. That's a big commitment. Now, they're going to sell those Sprinter vans and somebody else is going to buy them, right? But overall, if we look at the whole systems in our society, we need to think about how do we actually re-engineer the whole system to be healthier. And, going back to the example of Uber for a moment, one of the things that's really amazing about the shift from taxis to Uber, it's not just about like how you call a cab on your phone or how you pay for it. It's actually shifted how people think about transportation. So way more people use Uber than ever would have called a taxi before. And take that to the next level. A lot of people are giving up their cars or only having a 1-car household instead of a 2-car household and just using Uber the rest of the time when they need it. And actually they're saving a lot of money, right? Not only buying the car, but the insurance and the maintenance and the parking and whatever, right? So that's actually like a system change, how people are thinking about their own transportation needs. And then take it to the next step. City planners are starting to say, gosh, well, if people are Ubering all over the place, we can take this lane and turn it from cars into bikes or buses. And we can change our zoning laws to say, instead of creating all this parking, like we can actually put up more apartments and help try and solve the homelessness problem with that land that's so precious now. So we can see that when we think about it, not just as a like, I'm going to make one different decision, but actually we as a society need to re-architect our energy system. Right. Okay, so how can each individual be part of re-architecting that system? And that's part of why your money and your vote counts so much more than turning the light switch off, which you should also do. But, we need to be thinking on a big scale too.
No, it makes total sense with the restructuring of the entire cities based on all these decisions and with planners and what's going to be the next, best way to promote, all this saving energy. It's a scarce resource, and you bring up a lot of good points. I just want to say, anyone else have any questions?
So
comments?
Thomas or who? I have a question. So throughout history, Jews can agree on one thing and probably one thing only, that we never agree on anything. So I think that you have a great group that is behind your views, but are there alternative views in this? I don't know that there are or not, but what would they be if there are?
Great question. I mean, I would like to say that the science is pretty darn clear. And look, I studied environmental education and biology in the 90s, and it was abundantly clear then. And here we are 30 years later, now societally just starting to take it seriously. And the experts say that if we haven't really figured this out in the next 10 years, we've missed our chance. So I think the real conversation is, what are the most impactful and maybe realistic levers for change? And one of the most complicated things about this issue, which I think we've now all learned this lesson through COVID, is that we're all in it together, globally. And so what each of us contributes, and by the way, the US per capita contributes way more than most of the rest of the world. One of the ways that we can really think about this is where are the biggest opportunities for change? So as we see China and India, for example, their populations and their energy use absolutely skyrocketing. How can we help those countries leapfrog over, instead of going from coal to gas and everybody buying a gas car and everything, how do we help them just like leapfrog to the future system that we now can imagine and know what it should look like and how to do it better? But also, I think in this country, because we do consume so much energy based on our existing lifestyle, how we can have those big levers for change. So I think there are multiple levers for change, and we can't do all the things all at once. So picking the things that are important to you and that you really believe in as a great lever for change, I would say that's where you should put your energy. And for me, my talent around this is kind of new ways to bring people together and build a collective voice. So in addition to the few things that I've done in my own family, the way that I felt I could really contribute to this is to bring a moral and ethical people together with a collective voice to say something out loud and hopefully catalyze some important change.
Very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, and I will have a follow-up as well to what you said about China and India that I'll get back to. But
Sure.
I'm actually in the automotive space and very interested in electric vehicles, and I've never heard this sort of Jewish perspective on environmental change. So it's good to hear. I appreciate your input there. But what I've sort of heard and often is mentioned is that actually it's not only automobiles, but also aerospace, jet travel, people, this sort of term of ecotourism, does it exist if you're using a plane to get there, which I think is interesting, is actually China and India being the two largest potential markets for planes and travel via air is a big potential issue unless we can solve for electric planes, which I don't know how far out that is, but certainly not in the capabilities today. So interested to hear kind of your perspective there on the ecotourism piece, as well as that, I think air travel is one of those big levers. I personally love to travel and go see other areas, but it is a big lever that we can all kind of make the cost benefit analysis in our life to reduce some of the impact on the environment.
Yeah. If you haven't already read David Egger's new book, The Every, I think you would enjoy it. It's imagine Facebook, Amazon, and Google merge and like data optimize for everything in life. And one of the things that they kind of tackle is exactly that question that you were just asking. It's totally true. It's a huge consumer of fuel. I'm hopeful that now that we've all gotten really good at this, that maybe like some of those business trips that people were zooming all over the poor choice of words, flying all over the place to get to, maybe they will opt not to, because we don't always need to be in person, although it's wonderful in other places. I'm going to answer your question in a little bit of a different angle about the kind of the idea of ecotourism in general, by saying money talks. So, for example, if everybody wants palm oil in all of their processed foods, then people cut down the Amazon rainforest to plant trees to get palm oil, or to graze cows to feed people who want cheap beef all the time. And that's a problem. But if the Amazon rainforest, while it's standing, generates more revenue from ecotourism than the cattle will generate by selling beef, then selfish people who want to make money will make a different choice. And ultimately, even those of us who are the most thoughtful, like big-hearted, ethical people, we still want to make money and feed our families, and we're still like capitalists and selfish at our core. And I don't say that in a bad way necessarily. It's just like fact of the matter. And so if we can, as a society, put a dollar value on the things that actually we want to lean into, and we make those better economic choices, then we're doing the right thing. You know, we'll lean into doing the right thing that much more. So for example, if the price of gasoline goes up to $7.50 a gallon, all of a sudden your electric car that's a tiny bit more expensive is looking pretty good, right? Because it's actually in the long run going to be cheaper. I made the same calculation about the solar panels on my roof. By the way, if you're interested in solar panels, one, my brother works in the solar industry and he can get you a friends and family discount. Number two, I didn't know this before I got into it. They start by just looking at a Google satellite image of your house, and they can give you a pretty darn good estimate of what it'll cost and how much money it'll save you just by looking at the Google satellite image. It's super easy just to be curious and ask that question. And when they gave me that report, it's like, well, I'm paying a little bit more in the first few years than I would have been paying for my normal electricity. But years 5 through 25, I'm actually paying less, even as I'm paying off the solar panels, right? That it becomes a better and better and better economic choice as the cost of electric vehicles or the cost of solar panels comes down and the cost of the dirty decisions goes up. So that was a long-winded way to say, actually, we need to evolve our economy so that people are making the right decisions when it's also the best economic decision. And when we get there, then we'll start to see really significant change. Part of that's internalizing costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question.
Thanks.
So Lisa, do you know anything about carbon offsets, and should we be doing them when we buy things or we fly?
Good question. I mean, this is ultimately, this is not my area of expertise, but I would say, there's two parts to that. One is an acknowledgement of the real cost of things like air travel. And we as a society and an economy have basically not internalized those costs. Like taxes on gas or things like that do it a teeny bit, but I would say generally we have not internalized that. So it's a way for people to opt into internalizing those costs, and acknowledging, I think it's a great way to just be mindful of the impact of your decisions. I know a lot less about how those carbon offsets are actually put to use and how much change they make, but definitely doesn't hurt. Do you know much about it? Do you want to educate the rest of us?
I don't know anything. I just see it when I go to the airport, and I know that occasionally if I've purchased something online, when you get to the checkout, it'll say, do you want, it's like a nominal fee. It's like $2 or something. Yep. Do you want to purchase an offset credit?
I mean, I think as our society does not yet internalize and value all of those things, by opting into it, we're starting to contribute. Ultimately, we need society to integrate that into everything, rather than it being an optional thing for the good-hearted amongst us, but definitely doesn't hurt to contribute.
How does the United States compare to India and China in relation to pollution? A lot of manufacturing in China, of course. But where does the United States rank as far as not using energy like gas, but just pollution with
I don't know the answer to that.
India and China? Because, those are the two biggest offenders. And, you hear stories, true or not, that they just take their junk and just dump it in the ocean.
I don't know the answer to that question in any real educated way. Part of that is about habits, part of that's about infrastructure, part of that's about total population, part of it's about regulation. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that those two countries, just based on the size of their population, any shift in either direction has huge outsized consequences. And those consequences impact all of us, particularly people who are on the coast. And we're going to start to see, we've already started to see climate refugees, people who have to leave where they live because of storms, because of fires, because of rising sea levels. And when I listen to the high school and college students talk about this issue, that's the kind of thing they're thinking about. Like, hundreds of millions of people will be displaced and have to shift around or die because of climate-related disasters. That's on a scale, we're watching that unfold in Ukraine right now with a handful of million people. Talking about hundreds of millions of people on a regular basis needing to move and shift is just, on such a scale that will be defining our world in the next 50 to 100 years if we don't take really swift and bold action.
So you say we have this window of time of 10 years. So what does that mean? If you listen to AOC, the world's ending in 12 years. But what does that really mean? What does that 10-year window really mean? And I'm not saying we shouldn't do something. I'm just saying, what does that mean? Because the world's not ending in 12 years.
Right. I like to think about it in terms of like your body system. Like, if you have an infection and you care for that wound or you take some antibiotics, you can reverse the negative effects and your body knows how to heal itself, right?
Right.
But at a certain point, if you let that go out of control and you have like complete and total sepsis in your body, even IV antibiotics may not actually get it well enough to turn that tide. That's where we're at. We've got a gaping pussy wound, and in 10 years, it will be unrecoverable sepsis. Now, is the earth going to explode? No. Is there going to be massive ecological catastrophe, and will the world look unrecognizable to us if we showed up 150 years from now? Yes, because as one system shuts down, it affects all the other systems, right? If your kidneys shut down, the rest of you is also going to be a wreck. There's just a domino effect of how those things happen. And I think that's what's so hard about this issue is that it's the interconnectedness of everything is so far beyond what most of us can actually understand. And the way that journalists talk about it is this one particular thing or this one particular thing. And if you try to hold it all in your mind or your heart at once, it's overwhelming and you just want to crawl under a rock and forget about it. Which is what a lot of people have been doing for decades because it's inconvenient to think about. It's emotionally, economically, socially inconvenient. And the next 10 years are going to be, we need actually policy that creates change now so that we will have started to reverse that cycle by the time we get to 10 years. It really hangs in the balance, like literally every election cycle, which is why your vote really matters.
I think that's very accurate. I think that unfortunately it was just taken out of the state budget. This cycle. So super unfortunate.
Right, and that's a great example of how actually who's in office, the fact that they're talking about it, and then it gets to the 11th hour, and when hard decisions have to be made, it gets pulled. So continuing to tell all of our elected officials, our state representatives as well, that this is an important issue. And by the way, the Jewish Federation goes to Olympia and lobbies on our behalf. Yeah. And they're lobbying on really important issues like hate crimes and anti-Semitism. Like, this stuff matters. Also, the Jewish community should be speaking in Olympia about climate. This should be an issue that is a Jewish issue. And it's challenging because if you look back at our history where we have come together collectively around the founding of the state of Israel or Soviet Jewry, for example, right? These are really big issues that our whole community has come together around and rallied and made change. And almost always it has to do with Jewish people. And this is an issue that is not specific to the Jews, but it really needs our community to speak up.
No, we believe that. And so I do actually think that is a very good statement about, it's obviously inconvenient and uneconomical, whatever, but that it should be a Jewish issue. A couple statements that you made are very, very important. And I think that each and every time that you talk to groups, maybe it will, ignite more interest. And you're doing a super job with your work. And I know that the Historical Society, who believes, changed our mission in December and believes in relevant issues today and joining forces and building bridges with other communities, looks forward to getting involved in this issue a little bit more. And something that we can work on for future partnership. So
fantastic. Well, I'm going to put in the chat here as we wrap up a couple links. The JewishClimateFest.org has the archives from this year and the previous year. There's a link there to YouTube, and they're also all on Facebook. So if you want to go back and watch any of them, there's dozens of events that happened each year. Some are more sciencey, some are more politics, some are the youth, some are rabbis. So feel free to go look through those. And if you're at all interested in recommendations, I care about these kind of things or whatever, feel free to email me. There's my email address. If you are interested in solar panels for your house, my brother works for SunPower and is able to give friends and family discounts there. So as long as you're using their product, I think it's a $2,000 or $2,500 right off the top rebate, plus you get that 26% federal tax credit, which I think was extended through 2022. I'm not sure if it goes past that. Probably there'll be other ones, but it'll step down over time. And that's a great example of where policy makes an important difference. The two organizations that work on a national basis are Hazon and Dayenu. Hazon does a lot of work with Jewish organizations. They have kind of a seal of approval if your organization has gone through a certain process to think about climate and make good choices. And Dayenu does a lot of advocacy on a state and federal basis. And they have, they're called Dayenu circles. So anybody can start a Dayenu circle and kind of get your friends or your congregation together. And those circles take on particular projects, or you can take on whatever their national campaigns are. So they have a campaign going on right now leading up to and through Passover. So checking out those two organizations, that might be a great place for you to plug into as well. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out.
Well, thank you so much for your time this evening.
You're
Lisa.
welcome. Thank you so much for
Really-
coming.
Thank you. Yeah.
We're really appreciative.
Awesome.
And this has been recorded and will be shown to other members. So again, very appreciative of your time, and we look forward to, all doing our part and more.
Thanks for coming. Have a good
Thank
evening,
you.
everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.